Still on the search of that one true love? On the limbo in this crazy world of dating, marriage, relationships? Well, listen to the Golden State Media Concepts Relationship Podcast, your one-stop podcast for everything about relationships.
Hello, and thank you for tuning into the GSMC Relationship Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Giovanna. I just want to come out and say that I'm really sorry that I wasn't able to get 2 episodes out last week. It's a little bit hard for me to, get 2 episodes out each week sometimes. I also work a full-time job that is pretty exhausting, emotionally, mostly, but also physically. But yeah, just know that I really put a lot of pride into, the stuff that I do put out. And, I don't want to rush the things that I am putting out. And I want to make sure that it's good and well thought out and well researched. And so all of that being said, I just want to say that I really love doing this, and it makes me so happy whenever I get messages from people who appreciate listening to them. And just know that I really do have a lot of pride in this, and that I try to put my best foot forward for all of the episodes I put out. That being said, I'm really excited to do this episode because this episode is going to be about perfectionism and how perfectionism can affect relationships. There is a lot of studies out there that talk about and have studied how perfectionism can affect relationships. But there are also some ways that you can combat perfectionism in everyday life and also in your relationships. Also, it has come up a lot in my feed, but there is lots of news. In our segments later in the episode. I'm going to be talking about some new news that came out that suddenly bisexual men exist. As you probably have guessed, I have a lot of thoughts about that, so we're going to be talking about that later on in the episode. And we'll end the episode out with some other podcasts you can listen to that relate to that. I mean, if you like this episode, this podcast, you might like these other episodes. They have to do with relationships and also self-help and psychology. So yeah, we're going to end the show with that kind of fun stuff. So, let's get right into it. So perfectionism. What is it? So perfectionism is defined by striving for flawlessness and setting exceedingly high standards for performance, accompanied by tendencies for overly critical self-evaluations and concerns about negative evaluations by others. Now, I don't know about you, but I am absolutely a perfectionist, and it really does affect almost every aspect of my life. And I'm working on that now, trying to step away from being such a perfectionist because it can be really damaging. The cool thing, though, is there are different types of perfectionism, and not all types of perfectionism is bad. There are some good types. So there is self-oriented, other-oriented, and socially prescribed. Now, the first one is self-oriented perfectionism. So this one is defined as I strive to be as perfect as I can be. It makes me uneasy to see an error in my work. I must work to my full potential at all times. I set very high standards for myself. And going back to what I said before about how there are good types of perfectionism and bad types of perfectionism, it really is like these are good traits to have, like but like it becomes a problem when you feel like you can't, if you're not perfect at all times, you're going to be less loved or something. And we're going to get into that a little bit later too. Other-oriented perfectionism will sound like, I can't be bothered with people who won't strive to better themselves. I cannot stand to see people close to me make mistakes. If I ask someone to do something, I expect it to be done flawlessly. This is also really big if you are really bad at giving other people tasks because you're worried that they are going to mess it up, and so you're the only person who can do the task. Again, some of these things are good to have in your life. It is good to have the people around you have high standards for the people that you associate yourself with. But it's also can make you seem very standoffish. It can make you seem very unagreeable. It can make you an unagreeable person, and then it can make you kind of someone who people don't really want to hang out with because of this. But it is also good to keep your friends and the people that you surround yourself with being held at a high standard. Same with the self-oriented perfectionism. It's good to work your hardest. It's good to strive to produce good work and to work at your fullest potential, but it can also be very damaging. So the third type is going to be socially prescribed perfectionism, and this one basically is like your individual self-worth is tied up with being a perfectionist. Now, this can be very maladaptive, and this can probably be the most hurtful if you identify with socially prescribed perfectionism. So those are as followed. I find it difficult to meet others' expectations of me, i.e., most of those expectations are like made up in your head and they don't even exist to begin with. The people around me expect me to succeed at everything I do. I feel that people are too demanding of me. My family expects me to be perfect. Very often, these ideas of perfectionism are made up in your head. So you might see, my family expects me to be perfect. You could be coming from a very dysfunctional family that requires you to be perfect, and that is very clearly made known. But most of the time, this socially prescribed perfectionism is coming from within yourself. You will find that you are going to project this need to be perfect onto other people and say, well, they need me to be perfect or else they won't love me or else they will be disappointed in me. And that is something that you will be putting onto them. And it's not a real thing that is coming from anywhere. So basically, socially prescribed perfectionism is the fast track for maladaptive behavior and abnormal behavior when it comes to perfectionism. And the other two obviously can be really bad, but, there are good attributes to take from the other two, which is, again, self-oriented and other-oriented perfectionism. But, like I said, the other one is you're on the fast track to having a maladaptive behavior. Now, as far as studies have gone, there has been quite a few studies. Most of them, though, have focused on married people, married heterosexual people in relationships, and how it affects a relationship. This study, though, is the main one that I read. It is called Diadictic. It's the one, it's basically two people. So Diadictic Perfectionism in Romantic Relationships, Predicting Relationship Satisfaction and Long-Term Commitment. Now, this study came out in January of 2012, and it was published in Personality and Individual Differences, and I found it on Science Direct. So basically for this one, they looked at university students. So they took 58 university students and their partners. So basically there was 116 participants in the study. And they did find that perfectionism had a negative, or basically had a positive effect on relationship satisfaction and the length of the relationship. And they looked at a couple different perfectionistic views. So they looked at partner-oriented perfectionism, which is a form of other-oriented perfectionism. And then in this study, the other meant the partner that they're talking about. So partner-oriented perfectionism captured perfectionistic expectations towards the partner. And then partner-prescribed perfectionism is socially prescribed perfectionism, where the socially stands for the partner. Thus, partner-prescribed perfectionism captures perceived perfectionistic expectations coming from the partner. In English, partner-oriented perfectionism is you want your partner to be perfect, and then partner-prescribed perfectionism is the perceived. So basically, if you think your partner wants you to be perfect. So partner-oriented is you to them. Partner-prescribed is them to you. How you think that they view you. And what they found, partner-oriented perfectionism has a negative effect on relationship satisfaction and long-term commitment in students' relationships. So basically, in 3 months, they weren't together anymore. So to continue to quote directly from the study, is this suggests that if directed towards one partner, other-oriented perfectionism is a maladaptive form of perfectionism having negative effects on the partner and on the relationship quality. Moreover, the present findings show that partner-prescribed perfectionism has an additional negative effect on relationship satisfaction. So basically, perfectionism is not good, especially for other-oriented perfectionism when it's directed towards the partner. The partner is always going to feel that coming from them and that pressure to be perfect, and it's never going to be good for a relationship. If you'd like to read this article, what I just did is Google dyadic perfectionism in romantic relationships, and I was able to find the link where I could view the full PDF of the study, which if you are someone who doesn't have access to a college or high school email, it can be hard sometimes getting access to scientific studies and scientific journals. But this one, luckily, because I just Googled the title and I was able to find the full study and print it out. But they also talked about, they had a whole section talking about previous studies that had been done before. But kind of like what I talked about before, the previous studies, both only did with married heterosexual couples. I couldn't find anything that included queer couples, unfortunately. And then they also talked about how in other studies they have done only one person or the other person. There was some studies that found a difference between genders. I think there was only one study that found a difference between genders. But all the other ones, it showed that men and women are going to be affected by perfectionism in the same way. So, I mean, if you'd like to read that section where they talk about some of the other studies that they have done in the past, you absolutely can. This is why I like using newer studies, because they have had all of the scientific studies that has been done before them, and can, use all of that data together along with the study that they're doing as well. So that's why I kind of like using the newer studies. Like I said, this one came out in 2012, so it's still like 8 years old. But I found a lot of them that I found came out in like 2001, 2004. So those are the ones that they refer to in this study, at least. So I also found an article from Goalcast. It's called 5 Ways Perfectionism Damages Romantic Relationships. Basically, this is going to take a lot of what this study said and condense it into a language that is a little bit easier to understand. If you are someone who isn't used to reading scientific articles, for me, it's been a while. So like I used to do it a lot, when I was in community college, and in college, quite a bit, and, in high school and all that stuff. But, if you're out of practice, also, a quick, tip. I always skip over, whenever I'm reading a scientific study, I always skip over the results section, and I skip over the method section, because that is just impossible to understand usually. And unless you're trying to get a good bit of information to get from the method section is the participants, because that breaks down race, gender, demographic. That is important, because all of those things are really, it helps you understand if the study is reliable or not, because you need a bunch of different people to have a reliable, succinct study. And that is on, just awareness for studies, because, you see a lot of headlines nowadays that have weird, big headlines to get you to click on them, like recent study says this, that, coffee is going to kill you. And then, you click on the study and there are 16 participants who are all white men in, the Northeast of the United States. It doesn't really make any sense. So anyway, it is important to, check your sources and all that fun stuff. So yeah, all that being said, this article kind of breaks down some stuff that is easier, more digestible than a scientific study. So some things that can damage the relationship if you are a perfectionistic person. Number 1 is going to be projecting expectations. So you might be upset with your partner because they might, it turns out your partner can't read your mind, and you want them to be the perfect girlfriend, boyfriend, whoever. And you are going to want to have the perfect relationship. You're going to want to have the picture perfect thing. And that just can't happen. Like, you're going to argue sometimes and things are going to come up, and that's just what it is. The second one is going to be framing conflict as failure. Now, I think I've talked about this in previous episodes, but conflict is not always just a surefire sign that your relationship is going to fail. It's just not. You can use that conflict to grow as a couple and learn how to communicate and learn how to fight correctly. I believe Stephanie actually just did, if I'm not mistaken, an episode about fair fighting. So definitely check that out. But conflict is going to happen, and arguments are going to happen in a relationship. A relationship is not going to be perfect. And the reason why you have arguments, and, as long as they're not the same arguments over and over and over again, and they're just not listening to you, I mean, that's a different story to have, or a different conversation to have. But conflict is not failure. It should be taken as an opportunity to learn and grow with your partner. So, misunderstanding the honeymoon period. This was really eye-opening for me, in particular, but, it's mistaking, falling in love and true love. So we're constantly, when you're falling in love, it's like that really just, you're falling in love, so it's eventually though, those hormones and those feelings aren't going to be there anymore. And it's important to know that that's because what that wasn't true love. It was falling in love, which is a little bit different. And that's something that we're always kind of going after, and we want to have that feeling of falling in love because it does feel good and it's intoxicating. But, it's not always going to be there. So when you are in the honeymoon phase, kind of prepare yourself, because when it isn't there anymore. So, the point is to develop communication and to develop that sort of stable foundation to move on from and to have underneath you for when that honeymoon phase isn't there anymore. Because as a perfectionist, you might be chasing after that feeling of falling in love and mistake it for true love, unfortunately. So that is actually going to be a perfect place to pause for a quick sponsor break. When we get back from that, I'm going to go over the last two ways that perfectionism can affect your relationship with your significant other. And then after that, I'm going to talk about some ways that you can combat perfectionism. And you can use it in all aspects of life, in your relationship, in work, in school, everywhere. So we'll be right back.
The GSMC Sex Podcast is a show that examines all aspects of sexuality, from physical to emotional to spiritual. Join our hosts as they discuss age-old questions, common misconceptions, and the latest topics surrounding sex. They'll tackle topics about sexuality from the complicated to the hilarious and everything in between. GSMC Sex Podcast is your show for all of your questions about sex, even some you might not have thought of yet. Download the GSMC Sex Podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you can find podcasts. Just type GSMC in the search bar.
So we are going to, in this segment, finish up some ways that perfectionism can negatively affect your relationship. And then we're going to finish off with how to combat perfectionism in your life. So the last one we talked about was misunderstanding the honeymoon period, falling in love versus, actually being in love. And then the next thing is going to be falling for the fallacy of quote unquote shared interests. So a lot of people think that their soulmate is going to have the exact same wants and the exact same likes and dislikes and hobbies. Yeah, that was the word I was trying to think of. But that doesn't have to always be the case. It is very important to have some shared interests with you and your significant other, but you guys don't have to like and dislike everything, like all of the same things. Like, you guys are allowed to have your own likes and dislikes. And, a lot of people who struggle with perfectionism will want to see a healthy relationship as a relationship where both of you have the exact same likes, dislikes, worldview, everything. So it is definitely something that can lead to codependency if you are someone who's looking for someone that has the exact same likes and dislikes as you. But to retain independence in a relationship, it is good to have time where you do your own hobbies separate from each other. And then you can also get creative by finding some things that you do enjoy doing together, whether that's, watching a certain TV show together, or something along those lines. But, you don't have to be the exact same person to have a healthy relationship, which, it's very easy for perfectionists to do that. And the last one is going to be trying to find the perfect relationship. I talked about this a little bit before, but, the beauty in an imperfect relationship makes it unique. Accepting things as they are, it doesn't need to be passive. You can detect the areas where high expectations can be the problem, and then highlight areas where problems are genuine problems, instead of it being just you have high expectations for the relationship. And just knowing that, you know, there are some things that you're going to actually have to work on as a couple, and to, again, going back to what I said in the last segment, identifying when, you know, it's a real problem, and learning that fighting isn't necessarily a bad thing. You can learn how to fight healthy together and fair. And there's a lot of sources on that, you know, online that you can Google and all that fun stuff. But, you know, you can, there is no such thing as a perfect relationship. It's just not going to happen. To have a very good and healthy relationship, it's going to require work, and it can be really hard sometimes. And you are going to have to put in work, and they are going to have to put in work, and you guys are both going to have to come in together, because you guys are, you know, you have to do separate work and you have to do together work, you know, and that's like one thing that I feel like a lot of people don't talk about is like, yeah, you guys are going to have to work on your relationship, but you're also going to have to work on yourselves separate from the relationship, you know, so you can identify the problems that may arise. So yeah, there's no such thing as a perfect relationship. That won't happen. So just, it's time to like recognize that now if you are someone who is looking to have like the perfect fairy tale relationship, because it doesn't happen that way. So moving on, how to combat perfectionism. Now, as always, I am a huge person for being, in your emotions, in being mindful of your emotions and being in the moment with your emotions, and really trying to figure out where that's coming from. So number one, the first step, you know, welcome to, Perfectionist Anonymous, is to acknowledge that you're a perfectionist. By acknowledging that you're a perfectionist, it's going to help you recognize it as a behavior. And by recognizing it as a behavior, you can figure out when your perfectionism comes out the most. Now, for me, it's going to be when something is going to be public. So, for example, like blog posts, podcast episodes, any presentations, stuff like that. But, you know, I feel like it might be that way for a lot of people. And for relationships, you know, if I feel like a lot of relationships, especially now, can be kind of public. You know, you want to have, you know, the Instagram posts that look perfect, and whenever you go to events or something, you want to look good, and, you know, and you want to come off as like having a happy and loving relationship and the perfect marriage and the perfect this, perfect that. And that's just, it isn't possible. So, recognizing that as a habit, so you can figure out, when it comes up the most and how to combat it before it starts coming up. And the next thing is you can basically figure out, what does it feed? Now, I talked about this a little bit before, how we have maladaptive habits that we usually start to help ourselves and to make our lives easier. It has to be serving some part of your life, or else you wouldn't hold yourself to such insanely high standards. And, you know, you want to hold other people to insanely high standards. So by understanding what it's serving you and what it's feeding, it will help you understand your perfectionism. So, you need to acknowledge it, that it exists. And by acknowledging that it exists, you can examine why you hold yourself to such crazy high standards that, you know, isn't even achievable. Oh my God. You know, you can't do it, you know? So the next thing is really important for me, because I am someone who's a big, catastrophizer. Yeah. That's a word. But basically, if you are like me, you're someone who is going to go to the immediate worst case scenario. And, a catastrophizer, oh my God, I can't say that word, is someone who just makes everything like huge, and like it's going to be the largest problem, it's going to be the biggest problem, and 9 times out of 10, it doesn't even happen, or it's not even realistic. So face the worst case scenario. So perfectionism is often a tool that you use to avoid failure. So it's hard to get over, but when you do, just look at the situation at hand. Think of the worst case scenario that could ever happen. So it's helpful to list everything out. So the worst thing that can happen versus the most likely scenario. And then talking them through with someone, maybe even your partner, a friend, somebody you trust. And so getting those evil, things out of your head, like, oh, this is the worst thing that could happen, and putting them down on paper, even if you can't talk through with them with somebody that you trust, by just looking at them on a piece of paper and realizing how far-fetched they are is going to help you get over those, big fears of the worst case scenario. And, you might not even need to be perfect, because it's very unlikely that the worst case scenario is going to happen. The next one is going to be identified standards needed. This is really important, and it's something that I have never really thought about before. But a lot of the times, you don't need to be perfect. Like in this article that I found off of maybush.com, which is, it's called 8 Ways to, 8 Ways to Stop Being a Perfectionist. It's mostly geared towards managers and people in some sort of leadership position. But basically a really good point that the author of this article did was that once they took a crazy amount of time to make this presentation really awesome and look great, and when they turned it into their boss was like, oh, I just needed that as a background and not for a client presentation. So they didn't even, all that work that they put in wasn't even necessary. It wasn't even important. And another really great example that they use is sometimes you need a stretch limo, and sometimes just a bicycle is fine. So by figuring out what is actually needed of you, it's going to help you understand the concept of the project, of what is around you. So by figuring out the expectations, it's going to help you a lot, because then you can still be a perfectionist within the expectations. So if kind of going back to the bicycle thing, let's say your mind immediately goes to you need a limo. You can, and then understanding that all you need is a bicycle, you can still have the best bicycle, but it's going to save you a lot more time because you understand the parameters of what's needed from you. So that's going to help you at least save a lot of time if you can't get over your perfectionism. So moving on, adjust your standards. This was really important for me and eye-opening for me in my journey into becoming less of a perfectionist. Now, a lot of people will sometimes say, I need a 100% of you. And you immediately, if you are a perfectionist, you go to, well, I then need to do 120% because my 100% is other people's 80%. So if you kind of change, what is needed, kind of say, when someone says, I want 100% of you, think you're 80%. Because everyone, someone who isn't a perfectionist, their normal percent is going to be 80%, whereas your normal percent is going to be 100%. So kind of adjust your standards for yourself. It does not have to be 120, 130% all the time. It can be a little bit less. It can be a normal amount. It can be only 100%. It does not have to be 120% all the time. So kind of think of what other people's 100% means compared to what your 100% means. It's okay to just be good enough sometimes. You do not have to go above and beyond on every single thing that you do because it's going to stress you out. It's also going to burn you out. So yeah, just knowing that it doesn't have to, sometimes things can just be good, and it doesn't have to be great, and it doesn't have to be perfect all the time. And this next one is another one that's really important to me, your self-talk. Pay attention to how you're talking about yourself in your head. Are you calling yourself lazy? Are you calling yourself unproductive? And when you start calling yourself that, start noticing how your self-talk supports your perfectionist behavior. And so when you catch yourself in that self-talk spiral, you can choose to replace it with something else. And this is something that is really important in cognitive behavioral therapy and things like that, is changing something that you'll say to yourself into something that's a little bit more healthier, a little bit more productive, instead of saying like, oh, you're so lazy and you can't get anything done, and you can't do anything right, that kind of thing. So when you notice yourself doing that, replace it with something else. So instead of telling yourself that you are lazy and you can't do anything, instead of recognize like what a hard worker you are and how much you did get done today. And when sometimes what will happen with perfectionists is you will use positive self-talk to start feeding into your perfectionist behavior. And when you see that happening, is like, let's just do some little more or something else. Like, or we can just do one more thing and add to it. Ask yourself, is that even necessary for this specific thing at hand that I'm working on? Because most of the time, it's probably not even necessary. And the next one is going to be give yourself a reason to move on. I think my best way to explain this is if you are someone who wears makeup. Now, let's say you're getting ready for a date. You do not want to give yourself too much time to get ready for a date. Now, you know how long you need to get ready, how long your hair takes, how long picking out your outfit takes, how long does it take to do your makeup. Now, if you give yourself too much time, you're going to get crazy with the makeup, and then you're going to walk out of the house looking like just a clown. And like, you're going to be like, oh, well, I can wear this glitter, or I can wear this like, crazy color that, I haven't worn since I was in middle school, because like I can pull it off, but you give yourself too much time to get ready, you're going to get carried away. So allowing yourself to step away from a project or from something that you're working on or anything like that, it's going to help you with perfectionism. So if you only allow yourself 30 minutes to work on something, it is what it is. You won't get carried away and do a whole big thing and make the project like 10 times longer than what it has to be. Set a timer for yourself and do the pencils down kind of thing. Like when you were in school, at like the hour mark when you were doing a test or whatever, it was pencils down and you couldn't do anything else to it. So usually though, before you do like adjustments and stuff like that, it's fine. It's perfectly fine. Just tell yourself that you're only giving yourself a certain amount of time to accomplish a project, and after that, you're good. You're fine. So my last tip for combating perfectionism is try doing experiments. So this could be used on doing just good enough for different stuff. So try doing the low stakes thing first. So like maybe if you're using this like as a college example or a school example, like doing it on like just a paper that, like a weekly paper or something, or a weekly assignment, something small that isn't really going to affect you too much. And just doing good enough. You don't have to make it perfect. You don't have to make it like, an 18-page research paper. It can just be, short little thing, very low stakes, whatever. And then see how that affects you, and, see if nothing really changes. If maybe your grade is the same as it usually is, even after you have done so much work. And then try experiments with something a little bit more high stakes. Like keep moving up, but start with the low stakes stuff first, and notice that some good enough is just fine. Because if you are a perfectionist, good enough is more than enough. Because what you see as being good enough and as being maybe a C, other people is going to see as like a B+ or like an A- kind of thing. So just know that it's probably just in your own head, and something that you see, but that other people may not see. So just use experiments on low stakes things and then go from there. And notice that, perfectionism isn't really helping you. Most of the time it's hindering you. And you have less time to do the things that you want to do because you might be spending hours on something that really doesn't need that much time or effort. So that is going to finish up this segment. In the next segment, though, we're going to be talking about bisexuality in men. That apparently it exists now, according to science. And then in the last segment, we're going to be talking, I can recommend you some podcasts to listen to if you do enjoy this one. They're going to be a mixture of relationship and self-help podcasts because that's how I kind of view this podcast, or at least my episodes as. So we're going to pause for a quick sponsor break and then we'll be right back.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
It started popping up on my Facebook feed to begin with, but basically there's a whole bunch of articles out now saying that new research affirms male bisexuality, and most of it was just like jokes, like, yeah, well, we already knew that. So first off, talking about bisexuality, if you've listened to the Pride podcast and probably any other podcast episode that I've done before this, you know that I'm bisexual, and there is a lot of stigma behind bisexuality. A lot of people feel like they aren't bi enough, or a lot of people will just say like, oh, they're just confused. People will say that bisexual people are more promiscuous than non-bisexual people, and that bi people, will always cheat on you, blah, 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 blah. Like, the list goes on and on and on. And it's exhausting. And so there's been a lot of, studies that have said that male bisexuality doesn't exist. My favorite thing is that, so these studies will have gone back. There's been a few, but in the studies, the people who have self-reported, so the men who were included in the studies that supposedly proved that male bisexuality doesn't exist, they had self-reports that they were attracted to both men and women. So the fact that they didn't just like, oh, well, believe them that like, oh, because they are attracted to both men and women, that should just prove that they are bisexual. It should be the only thing that counts. But basically, in the most recent study that they have done, the latest analysis examines nearly all previously published data from 8 previous studies in the United States, United Kingdom, and Canada, including a sample of 474 to 588 men. And while it notes that some studies did not find genital arousal patterns to suggest bisexuality, bisexual identified men self-reported subjective arousal to both men and women. So in this study that confirmed, the most recent one that confirmed, they had genital arousal and self-reporting. So like what this most recent study did. So highly robust results showed that bisexual identified men's genital and subjective arousal patterns were more bisexual than were those who identified as exclusively heterosexual or homosexual. So basically what that means is that they took homosexual men and heterosexual men and then examined their self-reports and their genital arousal to both men and women. And obviously bisexual men were the most, who were just attracted to everything. So yeah, it's just like, I felt like I had to discuss this because it was in the news recently. And, but just know that like, bisexual people exist. So yeah, I guess, one of the authors, J. Michael Bailey, who is a professor in the Department of Psychology at Northwestern University, he was an author of the study 15 years ago that failed to detect a distinct pattern of genital sexual arousal in relation among bisexual men and concluded that male bisexuality instead represented a style of interpreting or reporting sexual arousal. This is quoted directly from him. I'm not denying that bisexual behavior exists, but I am saying that in men there's no hint that true bisexual arousal exists, and that for men arousal is orientation. So this, not only did this study provide just blatant biphobia for men and just saying that bisexuality in men doesn't exist, but it completely disregards the Kinsey scale, which I think I talked about recently. But basically the Kinsey scale is a scale that shows that sexuality is a sliding scale. It can also change I mean, in my opinion, it might adjust over time as you kind of figure out, because it is self-reported. But basically, the Kinsey scale shows that sexuality exists on a sliding scale. So it depends. You can be homosexual, heterosexual, bisexual. And it can be, you can be like 100% heterosexual, 100% homosexual, 100% bisexual, but you can also be like 94% heterosexual and 6% homosexual. Like, it's a sliding scale, and we're all, it just depends on who we are. Like, I had this, conversation with a friend of mine who was like, yeah, you know, like, I'm dating a guy right now, but, you know, I've dated women in the past and it's fine. You know, but like, she identifies as someone who is heterosexual. And that just goes to say that all sexuality is on a scale and on a sliding scale. And you know, it's not black or white. So it's a study that was extremely damaging to the bisexual community. So they also took, like, they studied the previous studies that occurred, and they said that previous research may not have employed sufficiently rigorous statistical tests, but after considering the limitation and potential errors in previous studies, as well as the context provided by since published research, the researchers concluded that they have demonstrated both genital and self-reported sexual arousal to male and female erotic stimuli in bisexual men. So it's, I don't know. I've seen it happen a lot for all types of people that, you know, bisexual men don't exist. And I feel like a big reason why this is such a big controversy is, one, we live in a patriarchal society where basically it's okay for men to, or I'm sorry, it's okay for women to act like men. Let me elaborate. It is socially accepted for, or at least more socially accepted. Now, I'm not completely glancing over the homophobia that lesbian women face and bisexual women who date women face. There's, of course, homophobia there. But The reason why there was, in the past, there has been laws condemning, specifically, homosexual behavior within men and not women, is because that we view women acting, quote unquote, acting like men as okay. Whereas if a man is going to date another man or be with another man, that is looked upon as him stepping down from his male gender norms. And that is bad because it's like a man is now acting like a woman, and being a woman is inherently bad. And when a woman is, quote unquote, acting like a man and dating a woman, she's acting like a man, therefore it's okay because she is acting like a man. That is where biphobia in men stem from. So from the patriarchal view on the society that men are inherently better, quote unquote, sometimes I get concerned that, like, if people take out, just snippets of what I say and, like, supercut them together, so it sounds like I'm a really, like, homophobic and racist person or something, but just know that I'm not, if you've listened to this full episode. But yeah, basically the biphobia with bisexual men stem from is just, like, this patriarchal view, and that, being a man that is both attracted to men and women is just him being gay, but trying to hide being gay. Like, it's the farthest thing from the truth, and bisexual men are just like that. They like men and women, and they exist just as bisexual women do. And, there was just all this stuff that came out that just made me laugh because, like, people who are in the queer community know that bi people exist, specifically bisexual men exist. But now we have, I'm glad that we have this article, or this study that came out saying that bisexual men exist. But it's like the damage has kind of already been done. It's like the same article that said vaccines cause autism, which was completely false. And the person who did the study and published the study, they've gotten their all of their accolades taken away and stuff like that. It was completely false. But, the damage has kind of already been done. There's plenty of people, even people who don't consider themselves homophobic, who are very open-minded, thinking people that still don't believe, bisexual people exist. And it's because, the damage has already been done, and we live in a society that believes if a man is acting like a woman, he is inherently stepping down from his role as a man. And so, yeah, it just, like, felt like that's something I needed to address as a bisexual person who has not a platform, but a very, a small platform, but, just something that, just to say that, yeah, if you're a bisexual man, you exist. And, I just hope that you know that, even if you've never even been with a man, you're still adequate. Not even adequate, you're more than adequate. Anyway, that, like, you can still, you don't have to, have sex with a man or anything like that and be a bisexual person or bisexual man and to know that you're bisexual. So just, I'm sorry that it took this long, for that to happen. And so, yeah, you're just as, important in the queer community, and you're just as accepted in the queer community as everyone else. Intersectionality is important. And so, yeah, that's pretty much all I have to say about that. So yeah, in the next segment though, I'm going to recommend some podcasts that you might enjoy. If you enjoy this podcast, we are going to pause for a commercial break, but we'll be right back.
Are you tired of the same old news? Are you sick of the seemingly endless political spin and negativity? The GSMC America Still Beautiful podcast is a weekly news podcast covering all the top positive and uplifting news stories. We cover stories that will inspire, uplift, and remind you of the good in the world. Tune into the Golden State Media Concepts America Still Beautiful podcast to get all the great and positive news stories of today. Download the GSMC America Still Beautiful podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type GSMC in the search bar.
Welcome back. So these are some fun podcasts that I found. A lot of these I do listen to, some of these I don't. Again, kind of the same for like the book recommendations. But yeah, so the first one is going to be Hanalyze This. I wanted to talk about Hanalyze This because, they did a really great, segment, like they did a whole group of episodes on perfectionism. And so if this perfectionism episode, you were interested in it, they examined their perfectionistic qualities and did a whole bunch of, self-help things to try to, get rid of their perfectionistic behaviors. So if you're more interested in perfectionism, highly recommend the podcast Hanalyze This. Their tagline is a self-help podcast that just can't help itself. And if you enjoy Hannah Hart, she's a YouTube personality. She's one of the hosts. Both the host names are Hannah's, which is why it's called Hanalyze This. It's really great. It's really funny. They're just amazing people. And I love that show so much. You should absolutely check it out. The next one is going to be Wonderful. That one is hosted by Rachel and Griffin McElroy. They are a part of the podcasting McElroy family. But their show is just about their, husband and wife couple. And, every week they talk about, just some things that they're really into and that they really enjoy. It's just such a remarkable example of, how to just be in a great, loving relationship where you're constantly learning new things about each other. It's just my favorite thing. And I feel like if you are in a relationship, it's important to just talk about some things that you are into now, because there's a lot of times in that podcast where they'll bring something up and they're like, I never knew this about you. And it's just cool to know that you are constantly learning about your partner, even if you've been with them for like 10 years. There's always something that, you can just learn more about them. And it's just a very wholesome show, and it's very good, especially if you need to kind of step away with all the craziness that's going on right now. Excuse me. So the next one is going to be Other People's Problems. This is, again, going back to, some self-help stuff. This is really, really great. It is Canadian, this podcast, but, it follows this, she's a therapist, and they are real life, therapy sessions. And she basically opens the door of what a therapy session looks like. She does change the names of the people who are in, just to protect their identity. But it's a really great podcast. And if you are someone who's afraid of therapy or doesn't know anything about it, this is going to be like a good podcast to actually listen in on what therapy can sound like. And her name is Dr. Hillary McBride. She's she's a therapist. I don't know exactly what she got her doctorate in, but she is just an amazing person. I do get a lot of my ideas about how to cope with and also being present from her, and how Also, just by listening to how she handles the situation is really great to understand how you can listen to friends and how to correctly talk to them if they are really going through a hard time. If you have friends who are going through a tough time and who might come to you for stuff, just listening to her and how she talks to people and how she validates people is just a really great tool to have as someone who can be an active listener to your friends. And that's something that I have also used quite a bit when talking to my friends who might be going through a more difficult time. So the next one is going to be called, it's called Unlocking Us with Brene Brown. This is an interview show. This is one that I haven't, heard of a lot, I haven't listened to, or at least I haven't subscribed to. But she is a #1 New York Times bestseller, and she unpacks and explores the ideas, stories, experiences, books, films, and music that reflect the universal experiences of being human, from the bravest moments to the most brokenhearted. She'll also interview people too. She interviewed Reese Witherspoon and Kerry Washington, so really famous actors and stuff. And I mean, it's definitely a good show for relationships and learning more about things like that if you do like this kind of show. So same kind of genre as this show. So if you do like this show, you can check out that one. So the next one is going to be Modern Love. So this one is actually really unique because they basically have true love stories and they're reenacted by famous actors. And so some of the actors will include, performances by Kate Winslet, Uma Thurman, Angela Bassett, love her, Jake Gyllenhaal, Sterling K. Brown, just so many people. And they really they'll have people submit real love stories and then have these actors reenact them. And so the episodes really aren't that long too. They're between 15 minutes and 30 minutes. So, we love a good quick 20-minute podcast episode. So yeah, it's definitely more unique and it's really cool. And the next one is going to be Why Won't You Date Me? Now, this one is hosted by Nicole Byer, who is just hilarious. She is a comedian. She actually has some specials on Netflix. I love her. She's amazing. But basically she's been single for decades. But she's this incredible person. So she kind of poses the question, why is she just always single? So her podcast that she hosts is just her on this quest to find that answer. And she, every week she will invite a comedian, a friend, or an ex to interview. And then, she'll talk to them about their dating life and, their love life and their sex life and all sorts of stuff. And, all on her quest of figuring out why is she always single? She's such a cool person. And yeah, she's so funny and just amazing. So also if you haven't heard of Nicole Byer anyway, she's hosted a lot of stuff. She hosted Nailed It on Netflix, which is a baking TV show with amateur bakers who go and try to do a Pinterest recipe or something like that. She's just so funny and amazing. And I first heard of her when she was on the MTV show Girl Code, but she's blown up since then. So yeah, love it. Check it out. The next one is Committed. So this one we'll talk about, it sounds funny because when I first heard about Committed, the podcast, it made me sound like it was somebody who was in jail or something. But really, Joe Piazza delves into just the inspiring stories of all sorts of couples, and they've just been through insane circumstances. And she wants to figure out how they're still together. So it's people who, maybe they had a son or daughter pass away, she interviews them and just figures out why, how they're able to come back from that and bounce back from that. And it's very cool. And the stories that people share are just incredible. So yeah, check that one out. That one is another one that's really cool. Heavyweight is another one that I listen to quite frequently. This one isn't so much about relationships or self-help or anything, but it is hosted by Jonathan Goldstein, he's just really funny and just delivers like this dry humor that's just very good. But the premise of it is to help people reconnect with some of their past selves. Like, a lot of people who will come to him for help is basically something has happened in their past that they might not be very proud of, or they wish had been handled a different way. They have done like relationships and everything and exes. But like one of my favorites is about this woman who she was in her undergrad, and she was a assistant to a professor, and she was experiencing incredible depression at the time, just stuck in this depression. And she just like stepped away and just like stopped working. And she would like wanted to find where this person was so she could just like apologize. And it's just really good. And it's very like therapeutic though, because they're able to confront their demons and figure out, and, Jonathan Goldstein, he'll go and do all the research and just like find these people. Like he's reconnected. There was a woman who had a daughter with this guy, and he ended up in a different like country and she was able to reconnect with him, and it's really cool, and definitely check it out. Highly recommend. And the next one is called D is for Desire. D is for Desire, my bad. And this one is definitely going to be more of a sex podcast. So if you want something that's more focuses on sex and stuff, it definitely talks about, the different types of desires that people have and the different types of kinks people have. So it's great if you want to explore sex and sexuality and love and just relationships. And it might help you if you are someone who might have a kink that you want to know more about, or to help you understand that you are normal and that there are other people who have the same kinks that you do. But yeah, the host, Noah Michelson, he introduced listeners to individuals who are willing to open up about their longings and their relationships in order to inform others about who they are, what they want, and what satisfies them, and why it matters. So sexual health is something that's really important to me, and this is definitely a great show to check out if you are kind of figuring out that area of your life and you'd like to know more about it. So the last one is called In Bed with Nick and Megan. So Nick Offerman, you might know him from Parks and Recreation. So him and his wife, Megan, they literally host a podcast that's recorded in their bed. And they are just the most wholesome, just funny, like the cutest couple ever. They've been together for 20 years, which like is crazy considering they're, actors. Because usually that doesn't last very long. But they'll interview, usually famous people, about their relationships and their sex life and also just life as a whole. And, so yeah, it's a really fun, podcast, and you'll probably recognize a lot of the people that they have interviewed. So like Aubrey Plaza, John Hamm, Conan O'Brien, like all these people are going to have like really in-depth interviews with, and it's recorded from their bed, which I think is just so cute and funny. And they're just like really wholesome people. Sorry, my phone fell on my microphone. But yeah, so that is actually going to conclude the podcast. I want to thank you all so much for just being patient with me. And, I've gotten some messages from people on my Facebook, and it just makes me so happy and just makes my whole day. But yeah, so I do have some ideas for next week, so I'm hoping I'll be able to get both podcast episodes out. No problem. But yeah, if you do have any suggestions, though, of what you might like to hear, please message me. You can follow us on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. If you just search GSMC Relationship Podcast, we'll pop up there. And it would be super cool if you could give us like and follow. And when you do that, please let me know because it makes me so happy and I can say hi to you. Another super easy thing to do to support the podcast is subscribe on Apple iTunes and leave us a rating and review. That would mean so much to me. Right now I'm pretty sure there's only like 44 reviews on Apple iTunes. So get those ratings and reviews up. Let's see you do your thing. It only takes a few seconds. But all that being said, to wrap up, I hope you guys have a great start to your week. Enjoy the Monday as best you can. And I will talk to you guys on Thursday. Thanks so much for listening to the GSMC Relationship Podcast brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. And I'll see you soon. Bye.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Relationship Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.